I will challenge myself to grind my puzzle rating from 2400 to 2600. Will I succeed? Furthermore, can I reach it without a single miss? Sit back, relax, and let's dive into a solid half hour of chess puzzles together. Here's the entire journey. Hello and welcome back to my channel. In this video, I'll be challenging myself to reach 26,000 in Lichess puzzles, and let's see how many puzzles I need to do to reach this rating. As a bonus, I'm going to explain a few tips and tricks on doing puzzles as well. You can see that I'm beginning on 2415, and let's dive into our first puzzle. Now, actually, before we begin, let me show you around the Lichess puzzle function. First, let's take a look at the puzzle themes here. Of course, as Lichess recommended, the healthy mix is the best choice. And I'm going to advise you to do this as well, in case you're trying to improve your chess overall. But of course, you can also do specific practices over here. All the puzzles in the healthy mix is separated into sections and included below. So let me just bring you through some of them. For phases, of course, you can choose by which phase you need to improve. And for example, if you're playing poor openings, you should practice the opening section, and it works for the same as middle game and endgame. What's even better, endgame is actually classified by piece selection, and in case you're playing bad queen endgames, you can just go over here and click on queen endgames. And by openings is also a very important thing to use. You can choose which opening you play, and you just click in and do basically every puzzle you can, and after that, you would get to know better about the traps in this opening and the potential tactics that can come up in the opening. Of course, motifs are pretty important too, especially for people who are learning the tactics one by one. It's a good place to improve and advance your tactics skills. Advanced is also other motifs as well, and then mates, another popular kind of puzzle. And basically, given that you are supposed to mate, you know only when you deliver mate in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or more, then you can do the puzzle correctly. So it's actually going to help you pretty much. The rest, special moves, goals, lengths, origins, it might not matter as much, but goals, I think it also can potentially be something helpful because you can know what goal you're going for if you finish a puzzle. But I wouldn't really recommend this because this lowers the difficulty of the puzzles and of course lowers the effectiveness of your training. Now let's hop back into the healthy mix and begin. So again, we're given this puzzle, and my logic is that first of all, before looking at the puzzle, you should count the piece balance. We can see that here the piece balance is mainly the same. We have 6 pawns and white also have 6 pawns. So if we can just gain basically anything, it's going to help us to win the game. Next, we look at which direction we're going for. For example, in this puzzle, I would say that the white king is slightly weak and we might need to try to attack the king. So the first few moves that pop up in my brain is a check and also a check over here. A good rule of thumb is that given any position, you should look at checks first. And of course, you should also look at captures. Rook f2 makes some sense. And then finally, you should try to attack something. For example, Rook h4 is something that came to my brain as well. So now we have the options, and let's go down option by option and see what we can get from these positions. So actually, the most simple might seem to be knight e2, because after check, we just back out with our knight and forking the queen and the rook. Rook f2 makes some sense, as I've mentioned. Rook f2, bishop e3, and I would think white's best defensive measure should be rook f1. And now, if I takes, and I'm just down material, which is bad. So we can roll out rook f2. Rook h4 doesn't really threaten anything. Knight f3 similarly doesn't make sense because none of your pieces can go to the g file and threaten the king. So let's go for knight e2. And indeed it is correct, and the follow-up is pretty simple, just knight c3, and you fork the queen and the rook. So some of you might ask, how did you notice immediately that after knight e2 checks and we do have knight c3? From a distance, this might be slightly difficult, or in other words, easily overlooked. Give you this position, I think at least 80% of you can get the puzzle correct and play knight c3. So the question is, how do we have this sort of sense that knight c3 potentially might happen? Well, my answer is it's basically pattern recognition. You look at the knight over here and you know that knights usually work as a forking piece. So actually the positioning of the and queen are pretty bad. So if I can get my knight over here or here, if the pawn doesn't exist, I do have a good position. And if I look at how the knight can arrive there, this is a forced route, meaning that this can win a piece for black. So let's move on and let's see what other tips I can give to you. So for this puzzle, it is an interesting endgame. And if you look at this and count the material balance, it's 2 pawns for us against a bishop. Obviously, if we want to win a endgame with pawns versus bishop, I need to promote one of the pawns and try to win the pawn endgame, right? Because the bishop, of course, is going to take on the pawn. In this case, basically the only move that makes sense is c6, because you can run away with this pawn. If you move your king it doesn't really help because one, it can take here, and if you move to e7 to attack the bishop just moved to another square, and again you're posed with the same issue, and you can never really stop the bishop from controlling c6. So let's just play c6, and of course it is correct. Now that we have simplified the puzzle one step, we can start thinking again. The obvious threat of the move bishop g6 is to f5, controlling the c8 square. And if we look at the moves, c7, bishop f5, king e7, king a3, king d8, the king starts to run back, and if we promote, takes, king takes. Okay, so from first sight, this looks like we're winning because we've won the g4 pawn, and afterwards we just move a side step with the king. But let's not get that happy just yet. So let's actually look at another possibility. So after we reach the position king a3 taking the pawn, so let's rethink it. After c7, bishop here, king up here, king takes here, king up to d8, black can actually go for what's called shouldering with the king. How? King b4, c8, queen, bishop c8, king c8, and then king c5, locking back the white king and avoiding the white king from touching the pawn on h5. So given that we can know this position, if we play c7 as a draw, and since we're down material at the beginning of the puzzle, we can actually accept a draw. But we need to double check and see if we can actually win. Since the threat here is bishop f5, let's take a look at king e6, stopping bishop f5. And actually, if you look at it, the bishop has scarcely any place to go to. Let's say, since the bishop can't defend the pawn from this diagonal, it moves down to d3. Now we play c7 again, and if bishop e6, it would seem as if it's defending the promotion square again. But the difference here is that after king d7, king takes, again, we promote immediately, takes, and then the king can only arrive to b4 after our king ends up on c8. So we are one step faster, and we can run over some more, and finally you can see that we grab the pawn first and we can promote. So in case you didn't follow me, let me show you the sequence right now. Oh, I think bishop e4 is the same. We just go here, and what I'm saying is in case of this, I go here, takes, I get there first. Why? Let's say here, and now the king can run up freely to reach h5 and successfully promote after something like king h4 or king f4. In the other line, if we don't play king e6 here, let's say if we just go for c7 immediately, the move bishop f5 can be played here, here, here. Notice that we're one move short compared to the last sequence, and now black can simply keep us from touching this pawn by standing on the 5th rank, and our king can never get close, just like that. Good. Now let's keep on going, 2 puzzles down. Okay, in this puzzle, the first thing we see, of course, is that the mate is being threatened. And of course, whenever we're looking at a puzzle, we should always be careful of the threats of our opponent. So I think this puzzle is actually a kind of prophylaxis puzzle for white. So we need to first stop the threats of black, and then since we have this pass pawn, we can promote it. Okay, so obviously, if we want to avoid checkmate, we can either move our king to g1 or play pawn to g3 or g4, but if we play that, black can just simply come over to f3. So I think the first move can only be king g1. And after king g1, let's take a look at what threats might be here. Since the black king can't get over this time unless it goes to f4 and g3, but if f4, g3, we promote with check, and then so I think black can only stop his own attack and go back to defend the pawn, for instance, rook a6. If rook a6, if we simply play g7, rook g7 protects the pawn. So I think the correct move here should be rook h6. And after rook h6, I don't really know what black can play now. Let's say king d2, and we just go for something like g7, sacrificing our rook. But after rook takes h6 all the way over, we just queen, and it's a queen versus rook endgame. And I believe queen 2 pawns versus rook 3 pawns is a win. So let's go for the sequence. Check first. I think I can only go here. Rook a6 back. As we mentioned, we can't play g7 because of rook g6. We defend. And if he threatens to keep on coming down, we just go up and promote. Great. Okay, another endgame puzzle. And actually, this puzzle is kind of a classic position. I think it's kind of interesting that this game over here actually played into this position, and I believe many endgame books might have already covered this position, so I wouldn't do much of a deep analysis. And let me just show you the correct sequence here in case you don't know. So the idea is that this pawn over here is going to lure the king over, and our king gets to run over this way. So for instance, here, the king have no way to go to g5 to protect the pawn, and if it takes here, it's obviously a win for black. Good, we're making progress. So on first sight, this would be winning, but let's never forget that we're supposed to look at the piece balance. So in this case, obviously, we are having some troubles because we're down a queen to a rook, and we need to find a way to attack the weak white king immediately and claim the win. So let's think. For example, if g8, of course, knight g3 blocks on the move. Okay, so if we continue with the obvious line, rook g8, knight g3. If we take, I think white should be safe, so there must be another option. Especially since if you take, there's also queen b7. So what about rook b2, protecting the pawn from being captured? And if we continue to think about this position, the queen doesn't really have a good square to go to. Let's say, for example, queen all the way back to e3. Now, the position seems kind of difficult, and especially since we need to think about the position in our mind. So I would advise you to first begin with trying to imagine the position in your mind. Okay, so after some time spent thinking, I actually think I came up with a decent idea in this position. What exactly? The move knight f5. Why? Because we're threatening to deliver checkmate. So because after knight f5, let's say white just skips a move. Then, in this case, we can capture on g3. And if recaptures, we do have rook g3, check. The only move, I believe, is king f1, rook b1, check, and king f2 and rook g2, checkmate. So knight f5 seems like a powerful resource, and even if the queen doesn't go back to e3, let's say it goes to an awkward square like a7, after the same sequence, the king runs to e3, we can still check here and go for checkmate. So again, it's also a pattern recognition, where the knight is controlling key squares around the king, and the rook just come down and deliver mate to the weak white king. So another thing that we need to consider is that after rook g8, let me clear the arrows first. After rook g8, knight g3, rook b2. What about queen b2? So after we takes, we notice that this knight is still hanging, and let's say g2 takes, and we count the material balance right now. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pawns against 6 pawns. But we also do have an extra knight. Since in this case, I believe that we should be winning. Okay, so let's go for the sequence. And rook b2, very important move. These moves are kind of difficult to find, especially since it's kind of quiet. But I think personally, it's still one thing, pattern recognition. And if you do enough puzzles, you do gain this kind of pattern recognition. Another thing is prophylaxis. If you realize that your b7 pawn is hanging and it is an important pawn to ensure your victory, you should always think of a powerful defensive move that also threatens something. And now after takes, of course, we just take. And on the next move, we win the knight with an extra knight. Let's continue. I think after 5 correct puzzles, we're 1 puzzle away from getting to 2500. And this puzzle, well, on the first sight, since this move has been played, the dark squares are kind of weak around the king. And again, very important is that we should look at the piece. And in this case, we are down a full bishop with no pawns as compensation. So of course we need to either win the bishop back, or we should try to attack the king to get something even better. Let's say, for example, check, just queen, after queen d4 check, after queen d4 the only move should be f6. After f6, the 7th rank is exposed somewhat, and another weakness is the f6 pawn. If we can somehow lure the queen away from defending the f6 pawn, let's say if we just capture on f6, and the queen is not allowed to move, and black can only go back to g8, it's again checkmate in 2. So we need to think of a way to stop the queen from seeing f6, in which this case, we come up with the idea of rook e7, blocking the queen from the vision of the f6 pawn. So after rook e7, only rook takes makes sense, because queen takes, rook takes, queen f6 is a fork on e7 and g7, and if rook takes, we have queen f6, king g8, and rook takes e7 now. So mate is threatened on both g7 and f7, so black can't really protect against both threats, because if queen f6, we just go for queen e6 checkmate. So I think the only move here should be queen e7 and queen e7 again, and now we are queen against bishop, pawn, rook, but the rook on h8 can't even move, and I believe the position should be winning for white. Okay, so after less of arrows, let's try the line. Good. As I mentioned, rook e7. Oh, he just went for queen takes. That's kind of boring. Just here, and we win. Okay, since we reached 2500, let's take a break for now, and I will see you later. Okay, now welcome back to the grind, and let's keep on going from 2500 to 2600. Okay, so our first puzzle is kind of easy because it's a classic endgame position. We just go for outflanking, and after that opposition, because we have an extra tempo. And after he goes back, again, opposition. If he moves up like this, it's actually kind of simple. We just make sure, yes, king c8. And after that, let's say if he goes here, we'll just go king c7, capturing this pawn, and this pawn is going to fall, or this pawn is going to promote, which is kind of a simple endgame puzzle, and let's continue. So now the puzzles aren't going to be all that easy anymore, right? So we begin with a puzzle where we're just down a full rook, but good news is that we're actually having an attack on this weak white king, because it's kind of obvious that queen f2 might be an option, and after queen f2 this actually becomes a pin. So after queen f2, king h1 on the move, I think there's actually the option of bishop g3, because after bishop g3, knight takes, we have rook takes, queen takes, king g2. Okay, I mean, I'm not winning back the piece, so it's not exactly that good. Let's take a look at another possibility. What about queen f2, king here, queen f3? Because after queen f3, the benefit here is if the king goes back to h2, we can now capture the knight. And after the knight is captured, queen takes, king goes back to the first rank, and we just play bishop g6, threatening mate in a few moves. So here, I think the only escape square for the king after queen f3 should be king to g1. After king g1, I'm not really sure. So this feels like the right solution. So let's first play until that move. Now the question is, how do we continue with this attack? So good news here is that the queen is just basically trapped and it doesn't have a square to go to. So we can operate on the king freely. So a move that comes easily to mind would be bishop g3. But after bishop g3, just knight g3, queen takes, and we can't really capitalize on the advantage. However, if we prepare a move before queen g3, so what is the problem behind queen g3, bishop g3? It's knight g3, queen g3, and king f1, protecting the on e1. So now, let's think of another move, preventing king f1 from a distance, because rook e3 now, let's say white does nothing, just let's say a4, knight g3, sorry, bishop g3, knight g3, queen g3, king f1, then we have f2, and this really must be winning for us, right? So I'm kind of bored to calculate any further. So king can't go to f1, only h1 makes sense. In that case, we can take on e1, takes, and finally queen takes, and after that, we can pick up a few pawns, and we should be at least 6 pawns against 4 pawns. Bonus, the queen is still failing to get out. So, the news, I think rook e3 should be correct. Half a day has gone past and I'm here to join you again. Okay, let's continue with this puzzle. So the first thing that comes up to mind is exchanging, and after knight takes, king takes, we have king e4. In order for black to not lose the pawn, there's probably just a random pawn push or king f6. If king f6, we can go here. After pawn pushes to h4, I think king d5 is winning. So this is a option that really makes sense. On the other hand, it's just g4 immediately. We can expect takes. After takes, king goes back, and we can both go here, checks, and after the king moves away, we pick up another pawn. So actually, we've got 2 options at hand, and now it's time to analyze which one is better, or which one is actually winning, and while the other one actually does not win for some reason. So now what we should do is to analyze why one position might not be winning. Okay, so let's begin with this option again. After king takes, king e4, king f6, I think here we can only go for g4, takes, and we realize that king e6 is actually a draw, and there's no way for white to make progress. So it would seem that g4 is the only option that makes sense. Okay, after this move, we either can take here and grab this pawn, but I think this position is actually a draw. If not, we are losing. So the other option would be what I just mentioned, which is knight h7. After knight h7, there's always king g7 and knight g5. This does seems to be up a pawn, but I couldn't really see how whether this is winning or is it just a draw, because of the resource knight f4 targeting the h3 pawn, which seems somewhat problematic. And actually, I just realized that knight g6 actually makes sense. King g6 after takes. Here we should be one move faster somehow. Oh, I think I realized. I think I see the answer. After takes, we go here, and this time we are actually up a tempo because the king did a little dance, like it went first to f6 and now it went to g6, and it should go back to f6 and e6 to defend. So we actually earn ourselves a tempo with g4, and after king f6, king knight g6, king g6, king e4, king f6, sorry, if king f6 of course it is take. After h takes g4, king f6, we go king d5, and this endgame is winning for us. So let's go into the line here. Okay, so what I would say in these kinds of endgames where there's only one pair of minor pieces or rooks, queens still on the board, the first thing you should absolutely look at is knight g6, exchanging. After exchanging, you first analyze why this might be winning or draw, and after that, you can think of a way to improve this exchange somehow. For instance, in this case, we won a tempo by forcing the king to f6 and g6. Because I could really say at least 90% of these kind of puzzles end up with an exchange at one point, but it's all about when you exchange. It's very important. Okay, let's continue. Okay, this position looks kind of crazy, and since it's an endgame where we have a queen and rook and two open kings, we can assume that we're trying to checkmate the king somehow, or perhaps win a piece. Since we're down a pawn right now, if we don't get the upper hand, we most possibly will lose, since our own king is very weak as well. Okay, so now let's take a look at how we might be able to win this one. Okay, so I would say the options that came into mind are queen a6, rook g6, and rook over here check, or queen over here check. So let's calculate them one by one. First we begin with, let's say, queen a6. After queen a6, let's just pick, after queen a6, there's this defensive resource. Oops, not this, of course. Queen c6. And we're forced to take, and after takes, we can just hold a draw. So at least we're sure that we can achieve a draw in this position, and let's see how we can actually win. Okay, the second option would be rook g6. After rook g6, the king must move, and it moves to e7, for example. After king e7, I think we can now check rook g7. Because if the king goes back to d6, this time we're targeting this rook. So if queen d8, we just win the rook. So if black does not go for king d6, let's say king f6, we have queen f8, forcing the king over here, and then is there a way to fork the king and the queen somehow? Let's take a look. Okay, I think it should be queen e8, check. And if the king goes anywhere onto the d file, we can always play queen e8 and win the rook. And if it goes back to f6, we win with rook. We win with rook g6 checkmate. Okay, this makes sense, and let's give it a try. Good, check here, queen e8, and queen d8, win the rook. Okay, so I would like to mention, I almost played an impulse move here. I almost just blitzed out this, because at first sight I thought this is just checkmate, you know. But always, never forget the possibility of a defensive resource, because our king is exposed, and an exchange like this can always happen. So honestly, in puzzles, really be careful. Another thing that I would like to mention is that whenever you look at a puzzle, don't calculate it until you have a feeling that it's going to be correct. You need to calculate it until you actually have something concrete here. So if I just calculated all the way over here and I checked, I didn't see that there's this idea of queen e8, queen d8 winning the rook. I might just play something really random. I don't really know what, because there's basically this one single check, but in another case, I might just make the mistake of not calculating to the end. Even in more extreme examples, that this position, I'm not really saying that this position is not winning for white. Let's just say there's this random puzzle that after some obvious lines that you think should be winning is actually not winning. That's where you usually make mistakes. Okay, so again, this puzzle is one of those situations that I've already mentioned. And if you have focused, I think the obvious approach here would be somehow exchanging on d5, but we need to first figure out when and how I'm supposed to exchange. Because surprisingly, in this position, apart from just exchanging directly and trying to go for these pawns, you can actually go first, you can check, and another interesting option is c5. Because after c5, the rook is forced to move, and since it can't move away from the pin, its only move is taking your rook. And now your pawn is located here with its own threat of promoting, and you might just have a better chance of winning. So now it's time for us to calculate. Okay, so in these kinds of positions, I always begin with calculating this line, which is exchanging directly, because you can analyze the line and you can look at how you can actually improve it. So after the exchange, rook takes, king takes, the obvious approach would be king f5. And after king f5, king c5, let's say, going on for a run, a pawn race, we take this pawn, it goes here, we go here, blocking the pawn, and after white takes the pawn on c7, this pawn cannot be stopped and will run all the way to the end of the board. But in another occasion, white might go for king e3, and in this case I would think I'll go here. He can't move his king anymore, so unless he wants to lose this pawn. So white is basically frozen. Okay, I think this actually works, and let's go for this. Let's make sure. King g4 doesn't seem to have anything wrong. Good. Okay, so what I would love to mention here is that this is actually not correct, because I realized I missed something, which is f5. quite a powerful move. King e7, then after takes, the king runs over, and let's say if we're willing to calculate this, the pawn race is actually even. Okay, so I don't think I would have seen h4 here. I would just stop this. And h4 now makes sense because it stops this, and this is just a theoretical draw. Good, let's keep on moving. 2572, we're making progress here. Okay, obviously this puzzle we're still going towards the king. The material balance is 2 pawns for us against, so of course we need to basically deliver mate. Again, let's first take a look at the options we have. The most obvious would be a check, king b2, and apart from that, I also have ideas like bishop b6 attacking, and perhaps somehow liberating my rook, like this, but always, never forget that there's actually this threat down the f file. So both this move doesn't make sense because your bishop can actually move away, and rook e4 doesn't make sense because of queen f1 immediately, and d4 would be way too much of a slow move. So let's just calculate queen b7. After queen b7, the king only has 1 square, which is king d6. And now is actually the problem. How can I actually checkmate? Ideally, I would like to have this bishop here, because after checks, if the king moves up, we have c4 checkmate. So b4 here, after queen b7 and king d6, b4 actually makes some sense. It's kind of a slow move, but it's actually a hard move to stop. And if c5 I just take, it doesn't matter, because our king is covering c6. Okay, so this actually makes sense. But another thing that we should double check is after here, if we play b4, let's say black does nothing, just perhaps moving bishop. After bishop c5, queen c5, b takes c5, king c5, we have a pawn, rook, queen against two rooks and the bishop, which should be a winning material balance. So let's go for it and take. Good. Okay, now I'm already rated 2589, and I'm expecting to be able to reach 2600 in the next puzzle. So for the last puzzle, let's try something very challenging. Hardest, plus 600. Okay. On first side, we have background problems, and we do have some checks, but does that really help? And if I want to cut off the king, it's not exactly easy, so I don't really see a good option straight on. Queen h3 is of course, and also another interesting check, but what does queen h3 actually do is what I need to think about. Because for both checks, the problem is that, let's say for rook e3, after checks, I think that can run, let's say to d6, and if I just check, the king keeps running. So it's actually very difficult to find a path. But again, as I've already mentioned, we should look for some quiet moves as well, not a direct attack on the king. So I would say rook e7 here seems like the only attacking move. And after rook e7, queen goes to a random place, and now actually we do have a mating it plan, because this move actually cuts off the king, and the king doesn't have a square to go to. Interestingly, black actually doesn't have a square where the queen can go to defend this. So after all, this is a difficult puzzle, so I'm just going to give it a try. Okay, interesting. Wait, he just gave me e7. Is it actually bad for white? I don't think so. Oh, because the problem here is after here, if I take, we get background native, as I've already mentioned when I first began the analysis of this puzzle. Interesting. So I think queen h3 right now would make sense, because after queen h3, it's either king d6 back into the same line, or it's the king running away, but this time, after it's, what I mean is queen h3, king c7, but this time rook e7 actually makes sense now, because the king can only either go here or there, and it's just winning with a check. Let's try. Okay. It would be very hard to believe that rook e7 is actually... Oh, wow. I actually did this. Great job. 28 points up, and we reached 2600. It's enough for today, and I would like to mention, if you're grinding your own puzzles, it wouldn't be as easy as this would seem, because I've been practicing a lot of puzzles on other platforms like chess.com and other smaller chess platforms, and that is why I managed to improve my rating immensely for the past few days. But after some comparison, Lichess is the best, because every single puzzle is hidden in these very commonplace positions. Like here, let's say king d6, it will be really hard to realize that a puzzle actually have this move. But if I'm going to tell you to play it in the game, you might actually play it. So it's really simulating chess itself. It's not trying to train you with puzzles, just difficult random puzzles. It's actually trying to train you like you're actually playing chess. So I really love chess puzzles, and I hope you can try it out as well and improve your chess as well. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.